Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone. Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to grow your family. We're your hosts, Emily and Leanne from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking with author Ruthie Ackerman about her journey. But first, this episode is brought to you by CCRM Fertility, where exceptional science meets deeply human care. CCRM is a national fertility network that has been a pioneer in the field of reproductive medicine for more than 35 years. They report some of the nation's highest SART success rates, and what makes them stand out is they perform pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy, PGTA, in-house rather than through a third-party lab, helping ensure consistency, quality control, and high confidence for patients. CCRM has grown to more than 40 locations across the U.S. since it began in 1987, including a clinic in Chestnut Hill, Mass., and monitoring sites in Quincy, Mass., and Falmouth, Maine. They offer patients personalized, compassionate care from world-renowned experts. Learn more on their website at ccrmivf.com or follow them on Instagram at ccrmfertility. Ruthie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily and Leanne.
We're really excited to talk about your story and to talk about your book. But before we do any of that, we'd love for you just to quickly introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ruthie Ackerman. I have been a writer and a journalist for as long as I can remember. And I had been writing other people's stories for most of my life. And in 2019, I decided to share a very personal story about how I had frozen my eggs when I was 35 years old and then tried to use them when I was 41, and how it turned out that those eggs weren't viable. And that essay that I wrote became a modern love piece in the New York Times and sort of catapulted me into this thinking that, you know what? There's a bigger story here to tell around my personal journey with figuring out if I wanted to have a family at all and how I would get there, as well as a larger kind of universal story for women and really everyone around rewriting the narratives around family making. And so I decided to write a memoir, which came out last year from Random House, called The Mother Code. And that's sort of the path to being here today.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So why don't we just jump right in? Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey to starting a family and where it all began?
This is a question that I've asked myself over and over again, like, where's the beginning of this story? I guess I would have to take it all the way back because even the first line of my book says I come from a long line of women who abandoned their children. And so I'd always grown up with this narrative of my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and even my mother abandoning their children in one way or another. So I grew up thinking that I had some sort of, let's call it a flaw in my DNA, that I didn't have good models for how to be a good mother, and therefore I wouldn't be a good mother. And so for most of my life, I was in the sort of hell no camp when it came to having kids. And I felt like, and saying I felt like is key here, but I felt like everyone else around me was in the hell yes camp. The world was telling me that everyone wants to have children, and I just wasn't sure, or I was thinking that I didn't at the time. And then I married someone in my mid-30s who also didn't want children. And then, because I'm a journalist and I research and obsess over everything, I started researching the women in my family and came to realize that the stories of how my ancestors had abandoned their children weren't the full truth or weren't the sort of entire story. They were really these mythologies. And we all grow up with family lore and mythologies. When I started to unravel mine, it sort of hit me like, wow, if those mythologies I had based my life on, that there was, something wrong with me, some sort of flaw in our family line, if those weren't true, then I was basing my decisions around family making on a lie or a half truth. And so maybe that meant that I could have children or a child. And so, but that left me in a position where I was married to someone who adamantly didn't want children. And I was starting to kind of thaw and feel like I kind of would maybe want a child. So fast forward, I end up divorced from that person and deciding I want to find a way to have a child, and went through all the different possibilities in my mind, eventually falling in love with the man that became my second husband, Rob. And when we went to start trying to figure out the sort of path to building a family, realized it wouldn't be as easy as we had initially thought it would be. First off, the eggs that I had frozen when I was 35, as I said earlier, weren't viable. And then we tried 2 rounds of IVF, and it goes from there.
So can I ask, so when did you make the decision to freeze your eggs? Was that when you were still in the like, this probably isn't for me, but like maybe I'll do this just in case? Or was that when you were starting to feel like maybe I am more open to becoming a parent, but I'm not ready for that now? How did that come about even?
Yeah, it was a just in case. It was one of these things where I felt like I couldn't, that even though in my mind I was like very sure that I wasn't sure that I wanted to have a child. And there were a lot of layers to that. I just felt like, you know what? You never know in life. Let me just try to freeze my eggs, because also I felt uncomfortable sitting in the inertia of, in my mind, doing nothing. And so it felt like I was doing something if I was trying to freeze my eggs. And so that was the sort of thinking behind the just in case.
Mm.
I'll do this thing. We'll see what happens. And I mean, one more thing I should say is that, so I had only been married 9 months. So I'd like not only made this commitment in my mind and to my then husband that I wasn't going to have a child, but we had just walked down the aisle 9 months before, making this commitment publicly to all these people. And that was sort of like the hinge. That was the condition under which we were married. So it was very hard emotionally, psychologically for me to, even consider thinking about like, oh, I'm gonna, explode our vows. And yet I was like, oh, I'm just gonna do this thing. It won't change anything. I'm just gonna do the thing. I'm gonna freeze my eggs. It won't change anything. I will also say that a friend of ours had gotten a cancer diagnosis around that time. And I kept thinking, oh, what if my then husband got hit by a truck, got cancer, any of those things? Would I still be happy with the idea of not having a child? And that sort of stirred something in me that actually maybe this decision was more about what he wanted than what I might have wanted.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's an important conversation to have too, in general in society, that freezing eggs isn't a guarantee. It's preserving a potential option. And so I think it's great that we're talking about that. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it works and it's what helps people build families, but it isn't a guarantee.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had understood that. And now looking back, there was a lot of research saying it's not a guarantee. There was, I talk about this in my book. So I wrote eggs in 2013, which was the first year it wasn't experimental anymore. And in 2012, the ASRM actually published a memo, paper, or whatever, saying, we don't want families and individuals to have the wrong idea that this is some kind of guarantee by
Yeah.
egg freezing. And yet I was in such a state of, I guess I would say, desperation or just trying to do something, that though I'm a journalist, I'm a reporter, I didn't do all the research I could have done. I didn't read all the fine print. And
Mm.
only later, when writing this book, I read that it's only actually 2% chance for each egg that you freeze that it will become a live birth, which is what they call it, at the
Mhm.
end. So, we're not told that. We're told that as young women, mostly single young women that freeze their eggs, we're told this is like preserving our fertility future and everything hangs on this. And that will work. Your eggs will be waiting for you when you're ready for them, which is not the case.
It's also interesting looking at the data in terms of the age of when you decide to freeze your eggs, because I think a lot of people are doing it when they're in their 30s somewhere, not as maybe a 23-year-old fresh out of college. But if you're looking at the numbers, there's more, not to say there's a guarantee at all, but there's more of a guarantee if you're in your early 20s than there is in your 30s somewhere. However, who is doing that? Who has the funds to do that? I mean, you're a kid still.
Right. And so I wrote about that in my book too. And then I wrote an essay for the Wall Street Journal about this idea that we're putting all this pressure on young women, younger and younger women, to be the ones that preserve their fertility futures. But at what cost? Because we already know women make less money in their first job than men. We save less for retirement. There's all of these pieces. And now we're putting the added pressure of, oh, you have to spend whatever it is, $15,000 in my case, to freeze your eggs for something that's not guaranteed, but also for something that we know helps everyone. We know from the stats that families and individuals that have children later, those kids end up being better off in all the various ways. And it's better for families in all of the various ways. So why are we putting that pressure on the women alone?
Yes. Yeah, there is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of financial implications. I mean, it was recently in the news also as, women step out of maybe competitive sports to take the time off because freezing eggs isn't just a, quick procedure, right? As we know, there's, weeks and potentially months of taking very expensive medications that make us feel a certain way. And then it's a surgical procedure and then there's a recovery time. So there's like time out of possibly work and sports. And yeah, so it's a big conversation. And I'm glad that people are talking about it more.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then can you continue the story a little bit? What happened after the egg freezing and then trying to use them and they didn't work? And then I'm sure your journey continued.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, the eggs were not viable. And I just felt this like gut punch that kind of, I guess the way I put it is that maybe I felt like a fool in some way that I had ever thought that it would work. There was a lot of self-blame in the fact that it didn't work. There was something wrong with me. There was something wrong with my body. And then I didn't know at that point what the other options were because I was 41. And if my 35-year-old eggs were not viable, what would make my 41-year-old eggs viable? And the other piece of it was that it felt like that was our kind of big Hail Mary and having a family, using those frozen eggs, and that how would we even afford to do IVF if it was a possibility? Because I know some people's insurance pays for it or their jobs pay for it, but that wasn't the case with us. We're freelancers, and so that wasn't something that we had available to us. And so we ended up digging into our savings and trying IVF for 2 rounds, and neither of those rounds worked. And then our doctor basically said, we recommend you try one more round, but then that was another $25,000. And again, no guarantee. And the first 2 rounds didn't work already. It seemed like insanity to try to do the same thing again. And so we talked to one other doctor as a way to sort of like just get a second opinion. And he said, if you actually want to have a baby, like give birth to a baby, you should try donor eggs. And that was the first time it sort of like blew open my mind in terms of what the possibilities were, because I hadn't really ever considered that. And so we had like this push and pull about, okay, if this is our last batch of money, are we going to try IVF with my eggs one more time for what at that point the doctor had said was a less than 10% chance? Or should we try the donor egg route, which came with tons of complicated feelings, which I'm happy to talk about. But then the success rate, shot up to about 65% on the first try. So we decided to go the donor egg route.
Do you mind talking a little bit about what that decision looked like emotionally?
Yeah. So there were two sides of that. Maybe you can tell already from talking to me that I'm like someone who's like, there's this and there's this. Maybe because I'm a Gemini. I don't know. I love analyzing all the sides of this. But on the one hand, I had always been sort of terrified of my DNA because I had these, stories of the mental health issues on the maternal line of my family. And I kept thinking, what are the kind of flaws in my DNA that I could potentially pass on to any child I would have? And then also, I have a half brother from my mom and my stepdad who was born with a triple whammy of rare genetic disorders. And so I was always thinking about, what's happening inside of my DNA and kind of fearful about that. So, on the one hand, when I found out that, donor eggs were an option, I immediately was like, oh, this could be a relief. I don't
Yeah.
have to worry about all that stuff. On the other hand, suddenly there was this feeling of deep loss because I thought, oh, yes, I said I had a line that I thought was funny in my book. I come from this like addicts and assholes, but they're my addicts and assholes versus someone else's family with all of their, unknowns of what's in their family line. And so I was feeling sad at that point for everything that would be lost at the cellular level by using donor eggs. And so I thought about like my hands look like my mom's, the shape of our face, like all of these things. What would that be like to look at a child who didn't share those, genetic traits? And so I was really balancing this, hope with this sadness.
Can you share a little bit about how your partner was processing this decision as well?
So he felt like he was, I don't want to say like he was pragmatic and I was emotional because that sounds so like traditional gender roles. Um, in his mind, it seemed to be as long as the baby is healthy, that's kind of all we should worry about, or that's all we can worry about, let's say. And so we have our genetic tests, we had the donor's genetic tests, we had the donor's medical history. And just to give you a sense of it, it's like, I kind of compare it to a dating site when you go into a donor database. So you're actually like looking at these pictures of young women, and they have essays and they have all of these like questions that they answer, and then there's their genetic tests and their medical histories. And so he was obsessed with the genetic tests and the medical histories, and I was obsessed with like looking really closely at the pictures to see if the women looked like me, because I got it in my head that if our child resembled me, and again, this is another leap, but in my mind, if the woman resembled me, then our child would resemble me. So there were a lot of leaps going on, but if our child resembled me, then we would have a stronger bond or a stronger connection in some way. And also that when other people saw us, they would see me as her, we now know a daughter, but like as that child's mother. I thought if we didn't resemble each other, that my failure would be imprinted on the child's face. And so resemblance became the thing I held on to, whereas my husband held on to, genetic tests and medical histories.
Mm.
So, how did you eventually decide on a donor?
It was so hard. First of all, not there's not a lot of of donors, I mean, there's so much I can tell you. You can cut out the stuff, but like once you go down a path with a certain clinic, you don't get to see the donors right away. And not all the clinics show you adult pictures of the donors. And once you go down a path with a clinic and start doing medical tests and stuff, it's like you don't want to then start over with another clinic. And so it's sort of, you're kind of hooked once you're at a certain point in the process. So by the time, and also I felt like it was a race against time, because by the time we had done those 2 rounds of IVF, I was already 42. And I'm like, I just need to be pregnant. So we decide to go with this clinic because they have a money back guarantee program. And in our mind, it's like, at least if we don't have a baby, we get our money back, because we'd already spent so much money and had nothing to show for it, so to speak. So we started with this clinic, and by the time we got into the database, it was like a dozen or fewer donors. Wow. That were even the basics of what we were in terms of like ethnicity, like white. I mean, we were just like, okay, what are the basics of like who we are genetically as people? And so, yeah, we didn't have a lot of choices, which, you know, is its own thing, which I could talk about forever. And so we were like, Rob, my husband, and I were back and forth, having these discussions. And then there was another part of me that was just like kind of crying every night, because I was like, there aren't a lot of options. We just have to sort of like pick somebody, like just, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And then something changed, because I went into a Facebook community for donor egg recipients. And I asked, how do you make this choice? And I got all kinds of answers, but one stranger said to me, just pick someone that you'd be excited to have coffee with, someone who you'd want to get to know better. You have that like spark with them. And I get the chills even saying it now, because it kind of like took some of the pressure off of making this like perfect choice. Also, like, I don't know, the last time I took a biology class was like 8th grade. Like, I didn't understand, like, how am I and Rob, like, not scientists, supposed to understand how to make a choice about our DNA? Like, what? How important is, SAT scores to, someone's SAT scores to who your child's going to be? I had said to Rob, like, oh, I'm so funny, and I want our kid to be funny. Is that because of my DNA? Like all these questions I don't know the answers to. And so the idea of just finding someone I wanted to have coffee with. And then the next time I went into the database, there was someone who sort of could look like my cousin and definitely seemed like somebody I'd want to have coffee with. And so I said to Rob, here, I think she's the one. And so we called the clinic and told the doctor, like, I think she's the one. And the doctor said, well, she's never donated eggs before, so I think you should go with this other donor that's a proven donor.
You finally made the decision, and now they're second guessing it. That's the last thing.
Now they're second. Exactly. But in the book, what I think is so important about that moment was, for me, my entire life, I never really listened to the voices inside of me that was sort of telling me what I desired. I'd always questioned. I always said, oh, society knows better, or my ex-husband knows better, or everyone always knew better than me. And so Rob said to me, you make this decision. What do you think? Even if it's not what the doctor thinks. And so I chose the one that looked like my cousin. And now we have an amazing, almost 6-year-old daughter named Clementine. She would tell you she's 5 3/4. Yes. And so that is there was nothing about it that was easy, but looking back, I think going through all the sort of decision trees and processes was part of owning that decision in a real way.
Mm. So, aside from the Facebook group, did you get support anywhere else throughout this whole process?
So we had to, I think it's mandatory. Everyone has to go through a psychological evaluation when you go the donor egg route. And I'm laughing because I remember thinking, like, I think everyone, no matter how you have a child, should go through a psychological evaluation. But then most people probably wouldn't have children, which is another question. But so we went through a psychological evaluation. But I wouldn't say that's like a supportive, it's just like, basically, do you plan to tell your child that they're from a donor egg? And the research says that you should. That was
Yeah.
basically what that turned out to be. And then I had a few people that I had told. I actually hadn't really told my mom or my dad because I thought that having their sort of voices in my head about what they thought I should do would just make the decision harder. But we told my best friend and we told my sister, um, and we told Rob's mom. And I remember just sort of showing them the picture of the donor and just sort of trying to get their like reaction. And that felt like they didn't say too much, which is exactly what I think we needed. But just knowing that they were in it with me felt really good.
Now, obviously, you've spoken about this so openly, and you've written your book, and you've had other articles. So the information is out there. How have you made the decision to speak about this to your daughter? And obviously, it's going to change depending on her age, but sort of what was your thought process and decision making there?
Yeah, so we knew that we wanted to, tell her early and often about donor eggs because so many secrets and so much shame in my own family. And we knew there was no reason for this to be a secret or for there to be shame. And so on our registry before she was born, we had all these donor books that we asked for. And so we were open not only with her, but with our community before she was here. And so when she was little, I would read her these books and there would be, I don't know if you've ever seen this book. Basically it's like there's a sperm and an egg, and not all people have eggs in their body, not all people have sperm in their body. And even when she was super little, like two, she would love saying perm, perm when she pointed at the sperm in the book. And so she understood very early like the different parts of the body. And we talked about when she got a little older that I didn't have eggs in my body. A nice doctor helped and a nice lady helped. She didn't understand maybe all the logistics, of course, but we'd, been talking. The conversation has been evolving over time. And now she's sort of like, doesn't care. She's like, cool story, bro.
Old news.
Yeah, exactly. She's just like, whatever, mom. I will say there's two pieces of this I want to say, though. One is that I remember the first time, even when she was super little, before she could even talk, reading her one of the books and kind of tearing up, not necessarily because of using donor eggs, but because it seemed like I wish our story was simpler. I
Mm.
wish that I didn't have to even think about how to tell this story. Like other people in my mind just have simpler stories. And so I remember tearing up. And then later, as like I kept doing it, as I kept reading to her and talking to her, it got easier. Like I felt that ache a little bit less. And so that has been, a wonderful surprise for me because I didn't know if for before I had her, I thought, oh, for the rest of our lives, I'm going to have this ache. And the truth is that I almost never think about it anymore. So that was one thing in my own kind of evolution. And then also the other decision that was hard was how public I would be about the fact that we use donor eggs. And the truth is that I wanted to write this book because I didn't see anyone else's story out there. Other people like me, I had felt so alone in the process. And so I knew from the beginning that I had to tell that piece of the story, the donor egg piece, and I had to talk about it, in all the raw, honest, vulnerable detail so that other women in my shoes or other families could see what this experience is like. Because if I didn't talk about it, I mean, nobody else was. And I saw all these celebs having kids at, all the ages. And knowing that statistically, at least some of them use donor eggs, but no one was talking about it. And young women then get the wrong impression about what's possible for their bodies if no one's talking about this past. And so I kind of took it upon myself to share that piece of the story.
Well, and that's so important too, not just to talk about it from the logistical standpoint. I think a lot of people just culturally understand that donor conception is a thing from a medical standpoint. But to have people talk about the emotional side of things is so helpful and so powerful. That I feel like is what really truly makes someone feel like they're not alone, not, knowing on paper that this exists as an option, but really getting to hear someone's lived experience. I think that's why, I mean, I'll give a plug for our donor conception groups. I think that's why they're so important because people, are getting the medical information, they're getting the logistical information from their clinics, from the agencies that they're working with, but they need to connect with people who really truly understand on a visceral level what it is that they're grieving, what it is that they're hopeful for every step of the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that because I didn't know anyone else who had used donor eggs, and I didn't feel like there was anyone I could talk to about donor eggs when we were making this decision, I just had all these like the worst case scenarios in my head, um, versus the reality that if I had known then that I'd have a 5-year-old and I'd almost never think about it, I think the decision would have been so much easier for me. And I'm not saying that everyone feels the way I do, but I do think that it would have been nice to like have the myriad experiences shared. The other thing I want to say, because I know that Clementine's our daughter. Clementine someday will listen to this podcast and read what I've written. And I want to make it clear for her and anyone listening that I don't want her to ever feel like she was like our a backup plan or our last choice. Because the truth is that now I think look at the whole story, our whole life situation, and think I would not want any other child. Like, I'm so glad that my eggs didn't work or, whatever you want to call it, my body failed, because this is like the child for me. And I'm not religious. I don't know if it's a spiritual thing. I don't know. But like, I feel really sure of that. And I never would have imagined I could feel this way at that point. And I want to just like share that with any listeners that not that everything happens for a reason. That's not it. But this is the family that I don't know how to say it. I can say this is the family we're meant to have, but then it does sound like everything happens for a reason. I don't know. Words fail me.
I think the sentiment comes through.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
So, as you have been so open, you made the decisions to talk about your own family and the struggles that you face trying to grow your family. What has the response been?
Oh my goodness. So many people, both those who have used donor eggs, who have thought about using donor eggs, who are just thinking about, having children or not having children, because I talked about that whole maternal ambivalence piece. So many people have reached out and told me their stories and their struggles and said that they wish that they could, you know, talk to their family and had more of a support system in their lives because there aren't so many places. There's so much silence and shame around it. And so I've just heard how grateful people are to have someone else's story of what they went through. And I just got actually, this makes me so happy, but I got an email yesterday from someone who I met just on Instagram before my book even came out. And I had been sharing this story about donor eggs, and she had asked me some questions, and we had gotten on a call. And then she sent me a picture of her and her baby and her husband
Oh
yesterday
my
saying, like,
goodness.
just so you know, you had a small part in this.
Oh, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, so it's been really amazing to see, like, to get that kind of response.
Yeah, I bet.
And now other people, like now I meet people in the neighborhood even who read my book and are like, oh, we use donor eggs too. We didn't tell anyone. And if I can help one person feel a little less shame, that's
Yeah.
something.
I'm curious when you first approached publishers about publishing this book, what was the response? Was it, wow, no one's talking about this. This is so interesting. Or was it, oh, I don't know. Is society ready to talk about this?
No, publishers were not excited. So I had already had an agent because I had written another book, another story for another time. But my agent had spoken to a bunch of editors before I had finalized my proposal just to sort of see if anyone would be interested. And the response was, we don't need another fertility book. Fertility books don't sell. People that are like thinking about fertility decisions want an answer now and they want to go online, and we don't need a book. And I was very frustrated with that, annoyed, because I thought, one, I don't see my book as a fertility book. Sure, there's questions of fertility in it, but there's also all kinds of questions. It's a book about a woman's life and the kind of decisions we make and what happens when things don't always go as planned, and how do we rewrite the narratives of our lives. And so I was annoyed, and I also felt like it was a sexist response from the publishing industry, because I thought, like, a man writes a book and it's like, the canon, and a woman writes a book and it's a fertility book. And so, but eventually I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write the book that I want to write, that I would have wanted to read, and let's see how it goes. And the truth is that my agent sent the book proposal to 37 editors, and only two were interested. So it was like rejection after rejection after rejection. And only now, in retrospect, the publisher is saying, I mean, obviously, Random House believed in it, otherwise they wouldn't have bought it. But now there's this sense like, oh yeah, there is a market. And I hate to think of like my own life as a market, but here we are. There is a market for books that dispel shame and break the silence on things that all of us have been taught to keep quiet.
Wow.
I bet
Thank
those
you.
other publishers are regretting that.
Yes.
They better be.
And thank you for writing the book because it is something that is needed. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So, Ruthie, it's been so lovely chatting with you and getting to learn more about your story. But as we wrap up, there are two questions that we like to ask all of our guests. We'd love to get your thoughts on these. And the first is, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is just starting to grow their family?
So, the one thing I would say is that this is a terrifying time, but it's also, and this is key, a really joyful time, because I think, at least for me, I was so focused, and I think society has been so focused on all the things to be afraid of in terms of starting a family, all the ways things could go wrong, or all the policies we don't have, and all of those things are true. And oh, there's a lot of joy that comes from having a family that I never even gave a consideration because I don't know, I couldn't wrap my head around it. And now I think, oh my God, I wish I knew how much joy there is. Instead of always being focused on the terrifying pieces and the dread.
Yeah. What would you say to someone, a friend or family member? How can they show up for their loved ones who may be struggling to build their family?
I think just listening. Listening is the thing that I think all of us could probably do better. I mean, the people that I felt like showed up the most for me were people that just kind of sat down next to me and didn't say much of anything. They didn't do much of anything. They were just sitting there with me, maybe put their like arm on my leg or something and just was like, I'm here. So I think listening is the answer.
Is there anything that you wanted to share that we haven't asked about yet?
I guess I'll just like riff for 1 second on something
Yeah.
that I think is important and then leave it. But I realized I had thought that the Mother Code, the title of my book, was about this flaw that I thought existed in my DNA. That's why I had called the book The Mother Code. Because of genetic code. But by the end of writing the book, I realized that the mother code is really about how we're told that there's these binaries of, childless cat lady and trad wife, and there's nothing in between. And the truth is that in writing the book and in living and looking all around me, I see so many versions of what it's like to have a good life as a woman, a human, with or without children. And so the hope that I was left with in writing the book, and I hope readers are left with in reading the book, is that there's so many ways to have a good life. And children are one of those ways. And it doesn't have to look the way you thought it would. If you want to have a family, there are so many ways to have a family. And if you don't want to have a family, that's okay too.
Well, that's beautiful. I love that so much.
Yeah, very well said. Great way to end the show.
Thank you both.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week with more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so that you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at allpathsfb or visit our website allpathsfb.org to learn more about our work. And please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support. And today, we want to recognize and thank bronze sponsor CCRM Fertility Boston. Your partnership is vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone who is struggling to grow their family. And to the entire All Paths community, thank you for being here. It's an honor to walk with you on your journey.